Section 30 of Tribal Custom and Anglo-Saxon Law. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Tribal Custom and Anglo-Saxon Law by Frederic Seebohm. Chapter 13, Early Anglo-Saxon Custom, Part 3. 4. The position of strangers in blood under King Ina's laws. The Six Hindmen. The question of the position under West Saxon law of strangers in blood is one of much interest, and we have reserved the clauses relating to it for separate consideration. There may have been several different classes of strangers. How far there was a considerable substratum of conquered Romano-British inhabitants is a very vexed question. That there were such in the outlying and recently conquered districts is certain. Mr. Coote's view may not be wholly mistaken that a Romano-British population, living as on the continent, under their own laws and customs, existed in most districts, especially in the towns. These strangers may some of them have had land, and some of them not. Certainly not all of them were regarded as theos or thralls. To what class, then, did they belong? And how were they treated? What degree of freedom was granted them, and what was their wehrgeld, if they had any? It is to the laws of Ina that we must go for the answers to these questions, and we start on the inquiry seeking light also upon the position of the as yet unexplained six-hind class, so often mentioned in the laws of King Alfred, but never in the later laws. The only hint we have had as yet as to the meaning of the six-hind class is whether Gaiskind men, not having land, may not have belonged to it. The wehrgelds of the ordinary classes of tribesmen were doubtless too well known to require more than incidental mention in King Ina's dooms, but there are several clauses, or fragments of clauses, especially mentioning the wehrgelds of the well and of the willisk man. Wel gef he hefath, hif heide hith bith, six hinde. Gif willisk mon haba hide, Londes his wer bith, 120 skill, gif he pona hebe helf, 80 skill, gif he nengen hebe, 60 skillinga. Signings horse whale, sepa him mage, Gerendian pas wergeld bith, 200 skill. 24. A wheel, if he has 5 hides, he shall be 6 hind. 32. If a wilslick man have a hide of land, his wear shall be 120 skillings. But if he have half a hind, 80 skillings, but if he have none, 60 skillings. 33. The king's horse wheel, who can do his errands, his wehrgeld shall be 200 skillings. It will be noticed that the wehrgeld of the willisk man with 1 hide of land is 1/5 of the wehrgeld of the wea with 5 hides, so that the whales and willisk men seem to be treated on the same lines, as if the two words meant the same thing. It is not easy to draw a distinction between the whale and the willisk man. Willisk is certainly used as the adjective corresponding to whale, though sometimes, as e.g. in willisk ale, for something especially Welsh. In the Lex Gallica, as we have seen, the Gallo-Roman living under Roman law, according to the Malberg gloss, was a walla, with a wehrgeld half that of the ingenuus living under Scalich law. And, without pushing this meaning so far as Mr. Coote was inclined to do, we may fairly, I think, look upon the word well as generally embracing not only native of Wales and West Wales, but also the wider class of persons of the conquered populations, whether Welsh or Britons or Romano-Britons, who were not recognized as of Anglo-Saxon blood. We may call in the later evidence of the Northumbrian priest's law into illustration. The use of oars and half-marks in this document, and its being, so to speak, domiciled in York, seem to connect it with the period of the Northmen's conquest of Northumbria, when York was its capital, and as yet the tide of battle had not been turned, i.e., shortly before the date of the compact between Alfred and Guthrum. In this priest's law, the penalty for the practice of heathen rites on the part of a king's thane was 10 half-marks, and if you wish to deny the charge, it must be with 10 named by himself, 10 named by his kindred, Maga, and 10 Waller went. And if he failed in the denial, he had to pay the 10 half marks, half of which went to the church and half to the king. And so also in the case of the Landagenda man, who had to pay 6 half marks, he too must deny with as many of his like, Gelikena, and as many went as the king's thane, and so also in the case of a Seerlisk man. It is quite clear that these Wallerwenta were free inhabitants of the district, for their oaths were taken in evidence, which would not have been done had they been Theos. The Wallerwent were, on the other hand, not recognized as Corlisk Saxons. They were obviously the native Celtic inhabitants of the Great Plain of York, the Gwent or basin of the Derwent, and the Ouse, the locality fixed by the clause which restricts the Sabbath day's journey on necessity to 6 miles out of York. Now we have seen that under Frankish laws, the Gallo-Roman population living under Roman law had half weregelds. If the freeman living under Salic law had a weregeld of 200 solidi, the Romanus possessor had a weregeld of 100 solidi. And so in the same way, returning to the laws of Ina, while the Geithskund or other landed Wessex freeman was a 12 hindeman, the whale who had 5 hides was reckoned as a 6 hinde. We have seen that the English carol, who rose to the possession of 5 hides, and paid gaffel to the king, and with coat of mail and over gilded sword followed to the feard, became Geithskund with a weregeld of 1,200 skillings. It is quite in accordance with the tribal feeling as shown in continental usage that the stranger in blood, whether Welsh or Romano-British, who had risen in the same way to the possession or occupation of 5 hides, should be 6 hinde with a half weregeld of 600 skillings. We have quoted the Northumbrian priest law and noted that its penalties in half marks and oars suggest that it belongs to the period before King Alfred's compact with Guthrum, during which York was the capital of the Northmen's kingdom. It is interesting to see that in the fragment of North People's Law quoted in the previous chapter, belonging probably to the same district and to the same period, some of the clauses with reference to the Willisk man are evidently copied from the laws of Ina, though with some additional matter and perhaps some slight errors in the figures. And if a Willisk man thrive so that he have a hide of land and can bring forth the king's gaffel, then his weregeld 120 skillings. And if he thrive not, except to half a hide, then let his ware be 80 skillings. And if he have not any land, let him be paid for with 70 skillings. Question 60. And it is worth notice that it was in this very document that the Northmen as conquerors, while leaving the English weregeld of the Thane at 2,000 thrysmas, or 1,200 skillings, gave to their own hold a double weregeld of 4,000 thrysmas. We may therefore regard the 6 hindemen of King Ina and King Alfred's laws as probably the Willisk man with 5 hides or more. There does not appear to be anything in King Alfred's laws to lead us away from this conclusion. Any other would leave the complete silence of King Alfred's laws with regard to the Willisk class unexplained, unless it could be considered that in the turmoil of the Northmen's invasions and the stress of the war, the Willisk class had already become more or less amalgamated with the Saxon population by the force of their common interests against the invaders. The silence of the later laws as to a 6 hind class may probably be explained by the same considerations. Passing from the Willisk man, who was 6 hind in consequence of his landed position, to the Willisk man viewed simply as a stranger in blood, there is further evidence that as a stranger he was regarded as only half as worthy as an Englishman. In S. 46 of Ina's laws, it is stated that an oath-worthy person charged with theft is to deny the charge with an oath of 120 hides if the accuser be an Englishman, but with only 60 hides if the accuser be a Williskman. Donna man mannen, betaith pe he, cape forstel ape forstolen, geforme pane scale, he be 60 haida, onsaken pare pif gif, he haida word bath. Gif pona inglesk, anstal gaforth, ansas pon betwe feldum. Gif hit pona bid wilsk, constal ne bid se had ne pa mara. 46. When a man charges another that he steals or harbors stolen cattle, then he shall deny the theft with 60 hides if he be oath-worthy. If, however, an English charge of theft come forward, let him then deny it with twice as many. But if it be a Willisk charge, the oath shall not be the increased oath. This clause does not tell us whether the Willisk man was considered to be oath-worthy or not. Probably he would not be as against a Saxon. It only states that when the charge of theft was made by an Englishman, the oath was to be one of twice as many hides as would be required to deny the charge of a Willisk man. Corroborative evidence as regards the half-welgelds and oath-worthiness of the wheel class may be found in an ordinance of later date, but belonging to Wessex, and it may be quoted as throwing strong light upon the position of the Willisk or well class, Walepedae, in apparently a border district, where Saxons and Wales met together with a boundary of a river between them. It is entitled An Ordinance Respecting the Dun Cetas. The leading fact throughout this document is that the two people met avowedly as strangers. Its aim was to keep the peace and to protect the owners of cattle on each side of the stream from the raids of their neighbors on the other. They are recognized as strangers to each other and on principle treated reciprocally as such. Denial of a charge by oath and oath helpers, unless by special agreement, is assumed to be of no use and evidently out of place between strangers in blood. Consequently, the ordeal was the only answer to a charge of theft. Ne stent nan other lad et titlan, but ordal betwaxt Welen and England, but man Paphian will. There stands no other purgation in an accusation, save the ordeal between Walas and English, unless it be allowed. This was fully in accordance with tribal custom, no less than the further fact that their weregelds were, obviously for the same reason, to be half weregelds. Gif wel englisking man of slain perf, he hein heide offer butan be helfan, where gildan ne Anglis, wisklin gon offer pe ma si he pagan boren, si he coral boren, helf where pe et feoth. If a whale slay an Englishman, he need not pay for him on this side except with half his ware, no more than the Englishman for a Willisk on that side, be he Thane-born, be he coral-born, one half of the ware in that case falls away. In this document, the whale is treated according to tribal principle as a stranger in blood, both as regards recourse to the ordeal and the half-weregeld. And the word wilseen is used as the appropriate adjective distinguishing the whale from the Englishman, so that in this case, whale and Willisk mean the same thing. Further, this evidence, though later in date probably than King Alfred's laws, is practically Wessex evidence because, though the geographical position of the Dun Cetas is not accurately known, their connection with the West Saxons is the one thing which is clear. Returning to the laws of Ina, as the weregeld of the Willisk man with 5 hides was half weregeld of 600 skillings, it might be supposed that the ordinary Willisk man's would be a half weregeld of 100 skillings. But it was not exactly so, for according to S32 above quoted, the Willisk man with 1 hide had a weregeld of 120 skillings, one with half a hide 80 skillings, one without any land 60 skillings. In an isolated clause added to S23, a somewhat different statement is made. The whale Gefagelda has the same weregeld as if he had a hide of land, and the whale Theo the same weregeld as the Willisk man without land. Whale Gefagelda 120 skill, his Sunu 100, Deone 60, Somwelke 50 gum, whale's hide 12 23. A whale Gefagelda 120 skillings, his son 100, a Theo 60, some 50, a whale's skin 12. That the Theo of this passage is the whale Theo with a weregeld of 60 skillings is clear from sections 54 and 74, the first of which relates to the Willisk white Theo. White penau monen wilskin mon scale, bedrifen b 12 hidem swa peon to swingum, Ingliskin be feor and pritig hida. 54. A Willisk white theoman shall be followed up with 12 hides like a theo to the scourging, and English with 34 hides. The white theo was a person who had once been free, but from debt or calamity had sunk into thraldom. The English white theo is dealt with thus in the laws of Ina. Gif white pio Engliskman heine forstali ho heine mine and 9 gild his Holford. Gif heine mon ofsley ne gilde hein mon his magium gif hi hein on 12 monthum ne alisten. 24. If a white theo, an Englishman, steal himself away, let him be hanged and nothing paid to his lord. If anyone slay him, let nothing be paid to his kindred if they have not redeemed him within 12 months. His free kindred might ignore him if they liked. There was no need for them to pay the weregeld of a kinsman who had forfeited his freedom. Section 74 relates to the theo whale, but this term would seem to apply to the case of the whale white theo. Gif theo well Englisking monen afslith thon scale seth heine I whereupon heine to Honda Halaford 7 magium othe 60 skill. Gasalan with his fior. Gif he thon thone sep now for Gasalan thon mot heine se Halaford gefreogen gelden sithen his megas thon where gef hi megberg habe freo. Gef he habe heden his tha geffen. Ne theraf se Phrygia me tham theoen me geldian butan he him will faith off Vesapian ne se theoa mid thigh Phrygian. 74. If a theo will slay an Englishman, then he who owns him shall deliver up to the Lord and the kindred, or give 60 skillings for his life. But if he will not give that sum for him, then must the Lord enfranchise him. Afterwards let his kindred pay the ware if he have a free magber. If he have not, let his foes take heed to him. The free need not pay the magbot with the theo, unless he be desirous to buy off from himself the feud, nor the theo with the free. This clause is repeated in the so-called Laws of Henry I, 170, but the amount named is 40 skillings instead of 60 skillings. 60 skillings is double the man bot of the Twihinde man in S 70 of Ina's laws, and it may be the double value of the whale theo to his lord. 5. The 12 hinde and the Twihinde men and their hindens of oath helpers. The silence of the dooms of Ina upon some of the most important matters relating to ancient custom is no doubt disappointing, but their position as almost our only direct evidence of the customs of Wessex for the first 2 or 3 centuries after the conquest of Britain gives to every hint a value. Some of the clauses are so isolated that if we could not approach them with light from other sources, we should lose the right clue to their meaning. It is only by following the course we have adopted of working backwards from the known to the unknown that we can rightly interpret some of the clauses by reading into them some things not directly mentioned by them. And yet, if we try to understand such a fundamental matter as the meaning of the division of classes into 12 hinde and Twihinde, it is to the dooms of Ina we must go. It is in these dooms that the meaning of the words 12 hinde and Twihinde is most clearly connected with the system of compurgation and the oaths of the oath helpers. It is moreover in these dooms that at first sight the mystery is made still more mysterious by the statement of the value of the oaths in so many hides. The fact of this connection between the value of the oaths and hides was first brought to our notice in the dialogue of Archbishop Egbert, apparently as a matter already well known and established. And it was his claim that the oaths of his priests should be reckoned as oaths of 120 hides, which confirmed what, from the laws of Ina, was hardly more than doubtful inference that this was the value of the oath of the Geithskund or 12 hind class. The archbishop's mention of it confirmed it, but left its meaning and origin as obscure as ever. And yet the whole question of the structure of Saxon society is so mixed up with the right understanding of the 12 hind and Twi-hind division of classes, that unless further light can be let into it, a good deal of what we should like to see clearly must remain unhappily enveloped in fog. Archbishop Egbert's substitution of the phrase so many tributari, or manentes, for the so many hides of the laws of Ina obliges us to regard the hide of Ina's dooms in this connection as equivalent to the familia of Bede. The Saxon translator of the Latin text of Bede translated the word familia sometimes by hide and sometimes by hiwisk, or family. In this connection, it is also worth noting that although writing a century later than Egbert and 2 centuries after the date of Ina's laws, the translator of Bede had not cast off all traces of tribal tradition, for he consistently used the word Megath as the equivalent of Bede's provincia. He still thought of tribes and peoples rather than of districts and provinces. His ideas in these things ran on tribal rather than on territorial lines. So to him the hide was still the family unit, and the greater kindred or tribe, as in Beowulf, was the Megath. In Beowulf we saw that some of them conquered others and made them pay tribute. So they did in Bede's time. While then we are obligated to connect the value of oaths reckoned as of so many hides with hides which were family holdings, or as Egbert calls them, manets and tributari, the original meaning of the connection must be sought for in tribal conceptions. It seems to be quite clear that in saying that the 12 hindmen's oath was an oath of 120 hides, and the curls presumably of 20 hides, we have not yet necessarily struck the real train of thought underlying the connection between oaths and hides. For it is absurd to think that the 12 hindmen could pretend to the occupation or possession of 120 hides, or family holdings, or the coral to 20 hides. They could do no such thing. The coral, in later times at all events, who had the twy-hind wergeld, was the coral who sits on Gaffel land, a Gaffalgelda on someone else's land. And to the great-grandson of the coral who had risen to 5 hides, the continued possession of 5 hides was sufficient to qualify him for a Sithkund status worth a wergeld of 1,200 shillings, or 2,000 thrithmas. The question, therefore, needs closer examination if we would rightly understand the meaning underlying the distinction between the twy-hind and the 12-hind social status. Let us then in the first place try to understand the meaning of the word hind, which gives to the distinction between twy-hind and 12-hind its important significance. The word, separated from its prefix, apparently occurs in only 2 places in the laws. It occurs for the first time in an important clause of the laws of Ina, and once more it occurs in the laws of Athelstan, in the Judicia Civitatis Londoniae, a word which occurs again in Anglo-Saxon laws after an interval of more than 2 centuries, may, and perhaps must have had a well-known original significance as a legal term, though found nowhere else in Anglo-Saxon literature. In Ina S. 54, the word is used twice. The first part of the clause, which has already been quoted, is as follows. 54. He who is charged with werfetha, man-slaying, and is willing to deny the slaying on oath, then there shall be in the hinden 1 king's oath of 30 hides, as well for a Geitskind man as for a Corlisk man, whichsoever it may be. In this first mention of the hinden, the word must mean the set of oath-helpers supporting their kinsmen with their oath, and the clause lays down the rule that in every such set of oath-helpers in the cause of slaying, there must be a king's oath of 30 hides. But what is this king's oath of 30 hides, which is to be in the hinden of oath-helpers of both the twy-hind and the 12-hind man in case of manslaying? In the compact between Alfred and Guthrum is a clause, already quoted, immediately following the statement of the wergelds of Dane and English, and the declaration that they were to be equally dear, which seems to be almost a repetition of the clause in Ina's laws, but without using the word hinden. 3. If a king's thane be charged with manslaying, if he means to clear himself by oath, let him do it with 12 king's thanes, and if a lesser man than a king's thane be charged, let him clear himself with 11 of his like, and with 1 king's thane. We have seen that the king's thane is mentioned in the laws of Ina, S. 45, and that his social position was much higher than that of the ordinary Geithskundman. The bot for his burg price was 60 skillings, i.e., halfway between that of the elderman at 80 skillings and that of the Geithskundman, having land at 35 skillings. The king's thane's oath seems then to be what is meant by the king's oath of 30 hides in the laws of Ina. But the king's thane's oath of 30 hides being the oath of a class higher than that of a Geithskundman, how is it that the oath of the latter could be a 120 hide oath, i.e., worth 4 times as much as that of his superior, the king's thane? At first the two statements seem to clash, but on reflection a spark of light seems to come from the collision. The king's thane's oath in this case is only one oath in the hinden of 12 oath helpers, supporting the 12 hind or twi-hind man. When a king's thane was himself charged with manslaying, the later law declares that he must clear himself with 12 king's thane's oath. The full oath of the whole hinden, himself and his co-swearers, would therefore be equivalent to an oath of 360 hides, i.e., worth 3 times the 120 hide oath of, may we not now say, the 12 oath helpers forming the hinden of the Geithskundman. The king's thane's official position was sufficient to justify the threefold value of his oath and that of the several oaths of his hinden. And if the 120 hide oath of the 12 hindemen be the full oath of himself and his hinden of oath helpers, then his single oath would be a 10 hide oath, which is much more within reason. The analogy would be complete were it not for the necessity of including in the hinden of the Geithskundman a king's thane's oath of 30 hides, but this may have been an afterthought. The mention of it in the law of Ina is in itself presumptive evidence that it was a new and an additional requirement beyond what Wessex custom had originally required. So far, then, it seems to be pretty clear that the 120 hide oath of the 12 hindemen was the 12-fold oath of himself and his hinden of oath helpers, each of whose single oaths was, like his own, a 10 hide oath. Adhering, then, to the meaning of hinden as the set of oath helpers, we have next to keep in mind that the oath helpers were naturally kinsmen representing the slayer's kindred and their responsibility for the vergeld of the person slain if their kinsman was the slayer, and by this consideration we are once more thrown back upon tribal custom. And when in the compact between Alfred and Guthrum we see the Ceorl who sits on Gafelland put in the same position as the Norse lysing, or newly made freeman whose kindred was imperfect, howbeit in course of being widened by each generation, we seem again to be put upon the scent that the twi-hind condition of the Saxon Ceorl may also originally have had something to do with his imperfect kindred. When further, in the remarkable fragment already quoted, we see the Saxon Ceorl himself rising in the social scale, getting land to the king's utware, having a coat of mail, helmet, and over-gilded sword, and doing direct service to the king, until at last, his son's son having had that land in succession, the great-grandchildren become of Sithkund kin with 12 hind wergelds. The scent seems to lie all the more strongly in the direction of the tribal rules of kindred. For it is as though we had watched the process of the growth of kindred in this case till the Sithkund condition was reached, and the full hinden had been produced, thus raising the twi-hind into a 12-hind man. The lysing, we learn from the Norse laws, being a newly made freedman, had at first no freeborn kin from whom he could inherit or who could inherit from him. He had no one of his kin to swear for him or to fight for him till he had sons and grandsons. For 3 generations the descendants were lysings still. And though during that time kinsmen enough may have grown up around them to swear for them, yet still their oaths may well have been reckoned of lower value than those of the Hald, each of whose oath helpers had a full kindred behind him to support him. It took another 3 generations to put the lysing in this position. There may then perhaps be involved in this matter of imperfect and perfect kindred a principle of tribal custom originally underlying the terms 12-hind and twi-hind. The oath of full value under tribal usage would be the oath of a man with a full kindred, i.e., with 12 hindens, each of full kindred behind him. Only with a full kindred to support him was his protection complete, because without it he could not secure a full oath of 12 sufficiently influential and powerful oath helpers. If he could claim from his kindred such an oath, then he may well have been considered properly a 12 hindman, because such an oath meant practically that he had the support and protection of 12 hindens of kinsmen in case of need. This might at first seem an unnecessarily large requirement if the oath were regarded only as clearing a man from the charge of manslaying. But going back to tribal usage, it seems no longer too large when the alternative is considered. The alternative was the ordeal, and on failure of the test of innocence, the feud or the payment of a weregeld of, as we have seen, normally 100 head of cattle. In either case, the slayer was powerless if alone. He was powerful only in having a full kindred behind him bound by ties of kinship and tribal usage, first to swear for him instead of his being put to the ordeal, and secondly to fight for him or to assist him in finding the 100 head of cattle required to buy off the feud, according to the proverb, buy off the spear or bear it. In either case, the completeness of his kindred was the measure of the power of protection behind him. The Twihindman, considered as the lysing or freedman, would not be in this strong position. His social status, resulting from his imperfect kindred, must be a low one. If he slew a 12 hindman, from the point of view of the feud, he would be helpless. The kindred of the 12 hindmen slain by him could not be satisfied merely by the slaughter of an inferior. Tribal custom of the continental Saxons allowed vengeance for homicide by a thrall to be taken upon 7 thralls. Under Mercian usage, as we have seen, it had been settled that the oath of the quarrel was to be taken as worth 1/6 that of the 12 hindmen, because the life of 6 ceorls was held to be equivalent in the matter of vengeance to that of 1/12 hindman. And thus it may be that in the case of manslaying, his oath and that of his oath helpers, all of inferior value, came under Anglo-Saxon custom to be reckoned in comparison with that of the man of full kindred as worth only 2 hindens against his 12. In the other passage in which the word hinden occurs, it has not so distinctly the meaning of oath helpers. It is not used in relation to homicide or weregelds, but still its use and its meaning are instructive. The use of the word in the Judicia Civitatis Londoniae is in connection with the organization of frithgegildas for the prevention and punishment of theft. These frithgegildas were groups or hindens with a common purse, and contributions were to be made for the common benefit. In the 8th clause, it was enacted that the hinden men should be collected every month, each 12 to a common meal. And if it should then happen that any kin be so strong and so great within land or without land, whether 12 hinda or twihinda, that they refuse us our right and stand up in defense of a thief, that we all of us ride thereto with the reeve within those manung it may be. And if it should then happen that any kin be so strong and so great within land or without land, whether 12 hind or twihind, that they refuse us our right and stand up in defense of a thief, that we all of us ride thereto with the reeve within whose manung it may be. These hindens were not directly groups of kinsmen and oath helpers, but they were artificial groups formed and bound by a pledge for mutual protection, and the use of the word hinden in this sense is significant. There were hindens of oath helpers under tribal custom, and now in the city, hindens of frithgegildas were formed for mutual defense against powerful kindreds outside their city who were in the habit of protecting thieves from justice. This was the way, apparently, that a substitute was found in the towns for the absent kindreds. And as time went on, these artificial hindens of gegildas or congildones, no doubt, in some measure, took the place of hindens of kinsmen in cases of homicide as well as in cases of theft. Naturally, in the course of time, the possession of property and social status would gradually take the place of the completeness of kindred, and the two elements in status would easily be associated together in common estimation. The value of a man's oath would depend more and more on the number of hides of land he was reckoned to possess, or for which he was responsible to the king's utware. If we may follow Schmid's translation of utware as heerban, and picture to ourselves the ceorl who had risen to the social position of a man with a kindred and having 5 hides to the king's gaffel, with his coat of mail and helmet and over-gilded sword coming up at the call of the king to the fyrd with so many followers, whether kinsmen or tenants, from the 5 hides under his charge, and so becoming Geistkund in regard to the king's service, then there would be force in the further clause which declares that although he had acquired a kindred and a coat of mail and helmet and over-gilded sword, yet if he have not that land, he is still but a coral. The power and strength and status of a person would still depend upon the combination of the two elements, and both would have to be reckoned with. A passage has already been quoted in which the possibility is admitted of a kindred becoming so powerful, magna et fortis, as to defy the king's law and defend the thief. There is another passage relating to breaches of the peace in Kent, in which the two sources of this power of defiance are mentioned together. The dangerous person may either be so rich or be of so great a kindred that he could not be punished. Adeo dives, vel tante, parentale, ut castigare non posset. End of section 30.